Okay, so we're going to use a valve spring compressor, and what that does is one side sits up against the valve head and the other side sits on top of the valve spring retainer, this big disc, and basically squeezes the two together, compresses the spring. Inside there's kind of a split lock which holds the retainer on top of the valve stem, and yeah, once you compress it all, take the lock apart, take the retainer off, spring comes off, valve comes out. See how we go. One half of the lock. Retainer, valve spring. This is the oil seal. And this is our exhaust valve. There is a fair bit of pitting and corrosion on the back of that exhaust valve. That will definitely have been disrupting flow. Okay, valve stem seals. So these basically stop oil running down the valves and into the cylinders. To get these off, basically just lift and twist. Basically just a steel band with a rubber seal running through it with a spring that keeps the seal compressed to the valve stem. You see that? And yeah, that's all they are. They're a little bit delicate. Always worth replacing really if you've got the head off. I'm planning on removing the pre-combustion chamber just to check it out. I'm not entirely sure I need to, but it feels silly to have come this far and not, although I can see daylight through it, so maybe it's pointless. Oh, I've covered my cylinder head in guff. All of this stuff keeps coming out of the water jacket. I'll hoover it out and compressed air it out anyway, but yeah. Always keep an immaculate work environment when working on engines. Or don't. This is the pre-combustion chamber. I can see daylight through it. I'm not sure there's any point taking that apart whatsoever. Maybe I won't take it out. But if I did want to take it out, dear viewers, I'd hit it with a hammer. Because I just want to see if it moves.
A few moments later.
Oh, lol. Lol, the African tree. Okay, fair warning. I wouldn't try this at home. I'm going to try and knock out the pre-combustion chamber. I don't think this is the best way to do it because there's a chance I'll actually damage the chamber itself. So if it moves easily, then great. If it doesn't, then bugger.
A few moments later.
Cool. Next job of the cylinder head really is to clean it up with a wire brush, and then we can see what condition the valve seats are in, put the valves back in, measure how deep they're sitting, which will give us some indication of how worn the head is, how many times it's been lapped, and then see where we stand really. See how the current valves clean up and whether or not it's worth continuing with them, or if they're too pitted then we'll need to replace the valves. Yeah, we'll see where we go. These are brass bristles. They're softer than the steel head, so safe to use to clean with. So this seems to have fairly extensive pitting on it, on the back. We'll have to see what we can do with that. It might clean up. That is buggered. That's not in a good way. Okay, having cleaned it up with a wire brush, I've seen better condition cylinder heads. And the intake valve seat looks great, looks fantastic. Looks like almost nothing needs doing to it. The exhaust valve seat, we've got some fairly heavy pitting. Yeah, I'm going to need to lap that, see how well that comes up. It is definitely going to recess the valve slightly from where it is at the moment. What I'll probably do is clean this area up, put the valve back in its terrible state, and see how deep it sits in the cylinder head at the moment. I will be replacing this exhaust valve, I'm certain of that. Yeah, it's not in great nick. So, be interesting to see where this old valve sits depth-wise. We'll go from there. I'm going to try some lapping. Lapping is a process of basically bedding the valve into the seat, so smoothing off all those imperfections. It basically uses a abrasive paste and a little kind of suction tool to hold the valve, and you basically spin the valve in place so it kind of cuts itself a new surface area, new contact patch. So just applying the paste to the valve. This is quite a thick, quite a coarse paste. So really it's possible that pitting needs a 45-degree grinder on it to remove, but I'm really hoping I can avoid that.
A few moments later.
Okay, so we've discovered that our exhaust valve seat in the cylinder head is damaged beyond what we can repair with the lapping tools, and basically trying to sand it smooth. So we've got to go to the next level, which is using grinding stones. Much more intensive and fairly easy to cock up. It's the first time I've done this job, so yeah, you're going to join me on this adventure and see whether or not I need a new cylinder head at the end of it. So let's crack this open, see what's inside and see how we get on. Okay, so one of the first things I need to do is basically measure where we're at in terms of the valve recession into the head. There's a limit to how far in the valve can go before it starts affecting performance. And obviously as we start grinding the valve seat and removing material, it's going to make the valve sit more and more recessed into the head, which eventually will be a problem. So I've already had a go at lapping this just to clean it up and remove some of the debris. So whilst this probably isn't the exhaust valve that will go back in, it gives us a good tool to measure where we're at to start with. So what I'm going to do is put this back in, and I'm going to take a measurement between the deck effectively and the top of the valve, and we'll see how big that distance is. And then after we've ground away all of the pitting, we'll see how much further down the valve is sitting, and that will give us an idea of whether we're good or not. So to do that, what I'm going to do is probably use a straight edge and feeler gauges. There are specific depth measuring tools which are much more suited to this job, but I don't have them. So feeler gauges and a straight edge, it will be. So I'd say there's 1.1 mil. I'm going to write that down. So what we do next, we pick a grinding stone that is bigger than the exhaust valve head. So next thing I need to do is reface this stone to make sure that this cutting face is at 45 degrees angle and is nice and clean. So I'm going to do that using this tool here. So that's our freshly ground face at 45 degree angle, ready to cut the valve seat. We then need to find an appropriate valve guide thingy, and what that will do is help align the cutting tool with the valve seat, so that sits where the valve would normally go. Okay, here we go. Wish me luck. So we're at around about the limit of sinkage on the valve that we're supposed to cut away. I'm just going to have a look at the valve seat width. About 1.86. I think it's supposed to be, or it starts at 1.77. There's still some pitting. Not nearly as much, but there is still some. I'll just double check the sinkage. I guess worth noting that because I've been lapping this valve seat with this exhaust valve, some of this exhaust valve material would have been removed. So if I put a new exhaust valve in there, it might reduce the sinkage slightly. So that's something to bear in mind. Yeah, I think realistically I'm at my limit of what I can remove there.
A few moments later.
Okay, that looks like it's reasonably light now. I'm going to try and lap that, see what happens. No, I think it needs a bit more. I think we've gone far too deep on that. You can tell we've actually just started cutting into the upper edge of the valve recess. So we've definitely taken a lot of height off it. Yeah, tough one that. That was some heavy pitting. Yeah, we're at 1.35 mil, so we're mildly over the limit. And I haven't lapped the valve yet, so that's definitely enough for the grinding. Has it cleaned everything up? I think as well as it's going to. Not overly happy with that result. Actually, I'm not going to lap the exhaust valve anymore. I'll wait till I've got my new exhaust valve and I will lap that into that, so they match up. Actually, the intake valve also has some pitting on it, on the back of the stem. Fairly mild, but I am tempted while it's all apart just to replace that as well. It's not that I couldn't clean it up, but there is visible pitting in the surface of it. And for the sake of £12–15, probably just worth replacing it. Okay, well, that was fairly devastating. So after you have re-ground the valve seat to 45 degrees to mate with this, what you're supposed to then do is cut a 15-degree cut above that, and then a 70-degree cut below that to give a smoother transition for the gas flow. But I don't have those cutting pieces, so that's not going to happen. Okay, we're back to the valve lapping. So we have our new valves. New exhaust, new intake. Before we do anything, I'm just going to blow out the valve guides before we knacker them. So the valve guides are the bits the valve sits in the head that keeps it at exactly the right angle so that it forms a good seat. Over time they do wear out. They're a massive pain to replace though. So I really don't want to have to do mine, and so what I'm doing is just making sure there's no grit sat in them. Should really be pushing this through from the other way. Yeah, so that when we spin our valve to lap it, it doesn't put unnecessary wear and tear on the valve guide. Now that exhaust valve is certainly sat a lot deeper in the inlet valve, which is not at all surprising. I'm going to have another go at measuring that drop. Wow, so that's about 1.55 deep. Ouch. So we do not want to do much lapping, that's for sure. Slightly interestingly, these are a different design. The old ones had slots in them, new ones don't. Maybe that will recover some of my my losses. You can probably just about see where we've lapped. It's kind of got a matte look to it. If you compare that to the new valve that hasn't been lapped yet, it's shiny the whole way down. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is try and just decarbon this exhaust port slightly. Irritatingly, I've left my hoover at the boat, So probably not going to get too far with this job, but we'll see how we go. Largely just want to see how effective it is, to be honest, as a technique. Help if we took the exhaust gasket off first. I think we're just removing a load of gasket material. I want to be really careful I don't chew through the cylinder head here and break through this jacket, because actually when you look here, these are the oil drains and that's our exhaust port running through the middle of them, so it's not actually that thick. So yeah, I'm going to be quite cautious with this. Okay, oil has to be drained at some point. Should have done this as the first job, but I didn't. So I'm going to do it now. I still don't know where my sucky pump syringe thing is, which is how you'd normally do it through the dipstick tube. But there is a drain plug back here, so I'm just going to drag the engine over the edge of the bench, hope it doesn't fall off, and hopefully drain the oil pan. First off, we're going to clean the valve guides, get all the grit out of them. We're going to give them a quick dab of oil before we put the valve stem seals back on. Use a quick oil up and a quick oil up of valve stem guides. Oh, that's not quick. Oh, that's brutal. Oh well, it's given us plenty of spare oil. Hello. Right. This is just an alignment tool. Not essential. Just stops you putting it on at a bit of an angle and tearing the rubber seal. Wonder if we have enough engine oil to lubricate it. Oh, we do. Who would have thought it? Okay. We're going to take our new valves, give them a quick wipe down, just making sure you're getting the grit off them really, and then coat them in engine oil. We're going to turn the cylinder head over, check our valve seats are clean. Okay, we're going to place our valves in. Okay, the valves back in. Okay, now we need to reassemble our valve train. Alright, all of this stuff needs a good clean. Get the exhaust spring in. Cleaning any grit off the spring retainer. Okay, we got our valve spring compression tool. And what we do is kind of opposite of what we did when we initially removed this. We compress the spring. I wouldn't be holding this quite so cat-handed if I wasn't doing it for video. Right, that's way over compressed. We slot these little split collet jobbies in. Okay. And now they're kind of captive in the spring retaining cap. So you can see they're kind of just held in there by that. And then if we were ready to go with the rocker assembly, we'd stick the little cap back on as well. So now, exact same procedure for the inlet valve. Okay. Valve spring arm. Retaining cap arm. Pop it on its side. Hope it doesn't fall apart. I've got to clean up the split collet again. I've leave some compression again. I'm going to go on, 'cause I'm an idiot. Probably didn't make it clear, but there's a groove in the top of the valve stem, and that's where those little collets pop into. And then yeah, as you release the spring pressure, Comes back up and that little seat just wraps around the collets, and there we go. Happy days. Cool. That's one job done. Okay, one of the jobs I want to do is just clean up the spray pattern on this diesel injector. It's not horrific, but it's not perfect either. It kicks up slightly that way, which would suggest, hopefully, it's just a bit of carbon buildup near the needle. Right, anyway, I'm disassembling the diesel injector because, as we've just seen, the spray pattern isn't a symmetrical cone. It's kind of asymmetric, it veers off to one side. Yeah, so what I did first was I released this top bit, which basically has a spring in it, which presses down on a needle, which pokes out of this nozzle at the end here. So I've just released the pressure on that. I'm going to disassemble this end bit, which will have the little nozzle in it. This is the nozzle nut, I think it's called. And then hopefully I'll be able to pull the needle out and just clean up any carbon around there that might be causing issues. I'm kind of hoping I don't undo this and we get springs flying everywhere. Let's find out. Okay, one nut thingy. Excellent. Right, we really need to keep this as clean as possible. And you're probably thinking, well, your workbench isn't that clean, so good luck. And you're right. Okay, so this is our nozzle. Oh god, why didn't I wear clean gloves? This is the needle. So this should drop under its own weight, apparently. It does not. Okay, so after testing the spray pattern on diesel injector, it looked to me like it needed some correction. So what I've done is I've taken the diesel injector out and I've taken the little injector nozzle housing out, which is this, left it soaking in diesel. And the needle for it has also been soaking in diesel. Diesel is a pretty good solvent, so I'm just going to give them a bit of a wipe down. Being as delicate as I can with this, because I really don't want to bend the needle. So one of the tests you're supposed to be able to do on this is take the needle, put it in the nozzle holder, take it to about 1/3 of its height, and it should drop under its own weight. Fantastic. Drop! Okay, I'm going to give that a blowout of some compressed air. Okay, basically, if we've cleaned it correctly, you should be able to lift it further the way up, and it should drop under its own weight. So hopefully now, that's moving more freely, and the nozzle is more clean, and the orifice is more clean. Hopefully that will have a nicer spray pattern to it. So now we just need to rebuild that into the injector body. When you're reassembling these, you need the nut that holds the spring in slightly loose, so that this can be done up to its full torque. Okay, sorry for the muffled voice. I'm wearing a mask because I'm about to be spraying diesel around, something I don't really recommend, but it's just to prove a point. So in an earlier video I said I'd show you how to set the diesel injection timing, so that's what I'm going to do now. You'll notice in the starter motor orifice, let's go with, there's this little pointer down here. Now on the flywheel there is a mark for top dead center, and there's a mark for, I think it's 15 degrees before that. That's the point at which this diesel injector should spray. So what I'm going to do is I've primed the system with a little bit of diesel just so there's something to come out, and I'm going to crank the motor over, and hopefully what we'll be able to see is at the point that passes the mark we get a squirt of diesel. So I'm going to go slowly. It's much more difficult with the cylinder head on. Okay, there's the mark. And there was our injection. And as we go past the second mark, so that we've done at a higher speed just to check the actual spray pattern to try and get the pressure correct in the diesel system. Oh, great. If the diesel timing isn't correct, to adjust it, it's not actually all that difficult. This is our high pressure injection pump, and basically there's 3 nuts holding that on, and between that and this casing there are shims. What you do is you actually space the pump either up or down to advance or retard the injection timing, and there's kind of pre-made shims of say 0.5 millimeters, and that will adjust it by a given amount of degrees of crank angle. So that's all in the workshop manual, but that's, it's fairly easy to adjust. Okay, the other thing we need to do is remove the cover for the zinc anode in the engine. That protects the engine and sometimes the prop shaft and the prop as well. It's obviously a service item, so it needs replacing every few years. I did replace this about 4 years ago, I think, so it'll be very interesting to see what condition it's in. When they're brand new, they look like this. Okay. The last one I took out was literally just the remaining stud. There was nothing else left of it. I don't know how long it had been in there since the previous owner did it. So I'm just going to loosen off that middle nut, make that a bit easier to undo. That holds the anode in. You can see there's been a lot of leakage around this. It's possible I didn't put a gasket on it last time, or I just did a terrible job cleaning up the mating faces of it. There we go. It's actually in incredible condition. Such incredible condition, it makes me wonder if it's doing anything. Interesting. Don't know how well you can see that, but inside the cylinder head it's fairly heavily corroded, particularly in the entrance to here, but outside of that it doesn't look too bad. So inside the cylinder head itself, it's not looking horrific actually. Would definitely benefit from some decalcification, I guess that is, but yeah, not horrific. Okay, we're ready to put the cylinder head down. Okay, we're ready to put the cylinder head gasket on. One new cylinder head gasket. So interestingly, a lot of these channels aren't actually flowing water. Looks like only specific ones are. Okay, mind slightly blown. I just had to halt progress for a sec to go and double check the head gasket fitment. So the workshop manual is actually wrong. The workshop manual suggests that these water holes, of which there are not many because most of them are blanked off, should be opposite the flywheel end. But the common consensus is they shouldn't. It also said there should be top stamped on here. There is no top. But if you look on this side, there is an A imprinted in it. That is towards the top, and the water jacket holes go towards the flywheel. So it actually goes smooth side up that way. That took me a while to work out, so hopefully that saves some people some time and clears up some confusion. Okay. Okay, so cylinder head mating face is cleaned up. We should be good. Drop this on. Hopefully nothing impacts on it. Righto. Head gasket's in. I've dropped the cylinder head back on, being careful not to damage the threads on the studs they went in. What I noticed and have sorted but forgot to record was one of the studs sticking up out of the block was actually loose, so you must always check those before they go in. If they are loose, what you do is just take two nuts, wind them both onto the thread, tighten them together using two spanners, and then basically torque down the top nut and it will thread the stud back into the block. And you do that to whatever torque is in the manual. I think it's 60 Newton meters I did for this. And then, yeah, then you're good to go. So head is on. I've already put the washers and nuts in place. I've lubricated the threads on these with engine oil, and I've cleaned them up. The reason you do that is so that when you apply the fastening torque to keep the head down, that you want it to be as equal as it can be across the studs. As we described in an earlier video, there is a sequence to fastening the bolts, basically 1, 2, 3, 4, up to the first phase. There's 3 phases of tightening. Eventually we'll hit 75 Newton meters. You do basically divide that by 3, so you go once to 25 Newton meters, then again to 50 Newton meters, and then finally 75 Newton meters. And I'll probably find the engine will want to spin off my worktop when I do that. So I'm just about to do that now. Okay, so we set our torque wrench. Make sure it's going the right way. And start off. Until you hear that click. At the lower torques, it's quite a light click. In fact, I've got a bit of a history with cylinder head bolts. When I rebuilt the top end of my engine on my first Renault 5, I actually managed to snap a cylinder head bolt. And it was a high tensile one as well. That was quite impressive, and that was because I heard this and I thought, that can't be it. So I pulled a little bit further and it moved a bit further, then clicked again. I thought, well, if that's torqued up, surely it won't move any further. Moved a bit further, clicked again. Basically carried on that process till I basically had my feet on the side of the car. And yeah, there was like an explosive bang, like a rifle bullet being fired. I disappeared into a hedge, the torque wrench disappeared into the sunset, and the top of the head bolt was gone. So yeah, that was fun. Right, that's 25. This is 50. Okay, and then finally 75. Yeah, we're done. Okay, continuing with the cylinder head rebuild. So we need to put our push rods back in. So this was the exhaust push rod and this was the top of it. So our exhaust is this one. So we drop it into the little cup in the block. And I'm oiling these up before they go in because these are kind of direct rubbing surfaces. So again, little cup. Okay, now we can replace our rockers. A little bit of oil on the caps. On the rocker assembly itself, a little bit of oil in the cups. A little bit of oil on the tappets. And I've already cleaned up this face here. Now I expect, because we've ground out the exhaust valve, this will now be sitting slightly higher, so I imagine we will have next to no clearance on the exhaust tappet. Be my guess. So what we're doing here is just making sure the push rods are lined up into those little cups. And then we're going to bolt this down and see how much clearance we've got. And I can already tell you it doesn't look like much. Okay, I can't find the torque in the workshop manual for this nut, and also one workshop manual seems to show a washer under here, but when I disassembled the engine, I've just watched my video back, there was no washer, so that's interesting. So I'm going to do it up FT. That's finger tight, or perhaps another variant of that acronym. There's a bit of play in that, which is slightly irritating. I will try and line it up centrally to the valves. Okay, now it's back up. You can see that there's a little bit of play on the inlet. Not too surprising because we did lap that mildly, but we didn't do too much else. And there is almost nothing on the exhaust. So we're going to measure that. Okay, so we're too tight on the inlet. Okay, so what we do is we undo these locking nuts on each of them, and then what that allows us to do is adjust this screw, and you can either tighten it to close the gap, or in our case we need to loosen it to open the gap. It's quite small adjustments. So what I'm probably going to do is hold that feeler gauge in there. Screw that back up. See how that feels. A little too tight. So loosen it a touch. It's got to lock the lock nut. Probably a little too loose. It really is tiny adjustments. Yeah, so now that slides, but there's a little bit of drag. That's what you want. So you shouldn't need to, but I like to put the screwdriver back in, just trying to ensure that doesn't move when you're tightening up the lock nut. Okay, we still got a bit of play. Yes, we have. Let's just double check our feeler gauge. It's about the amount of drag we want. So obviously, if you run these too tight, as I previously explained, then as it heats up, you'll have the valves permanently lifted off their seats, which means they'll overheat on the edges. They won't transfer heat into the cylinder head and they'll burn out. If you have them too loose, then of course you're wasting valve lift. Your valve isn't opening as much as it should, and therefore you'll sacrifice performance. So exhaust valve, please up. About that. Yeah, I like that. Cool. Right, that's those done. So now all it's left to do is put the new rocker cover gasket on, and put the rocker cover back on, and then once the diesel injector's in, that's sealed up. I'll use the access I've got to do this rear oil feed back up. Easy one to forget this because it's kind of hidden. Okay, now the majority of the engine is loosely back together. What I'm going to do is everything that I've kind of done up, but I'm unsure on the torque values of the critical, like oil banjo fittings, which are like these kind of things. That's a banjo fitting, and these diesel banjo fittings, and these clamps holding diesel injector in. I'm going to go find out the torque values for those now while I remember, torque those all up so I can forget about them. And then really my next stage is work out what I want to put on the engine before I start cleaning up and spray painting. I think for the moment I've cleaned up various elements of the cooling intake, water parts, so they're all clean and good to go. Happy for those to be painted, but what I don't want is those obscuring other areas that I want painted. So I think I'm just going to mask off all the kind of various ports and holes that are still exposed, and then degrease and maybe steam clean the engine to see how it looks, and then we'll consider our options with spraying it and see how we go from there. So at about this point that the posh torque wrench has come out. Never let it be said that I'm not a perfectionist. No, but seriously, I've damaged banjos in the past, and it is not fun because trying to track down leaks in engine bays is, yeah, just always a pain. So anything you can do to minimize that. So yeah, the other thing is with kind of soft aluminium casings like this, you don't want to be over torquing bolts like that because it will literally just tear it apart. So this torque wrench goes down to 2, no, it goes down to 1 Newton meter, so it will go from 1 to 20, so it's good for kind of fine work like this. Right then, let's have a go at cleaning this thing. Okay, so some degreaser is on. Some violent steam cleaning is ongoing. Probably going to regret not sealing off my water pump. Rust or grease? You decide. I just remembered I said I wasn't going to do this until I was ready to paint. Whoops. So most of the engine's back together now, so tonight I'm just investigating different methods of cleaning up the condition of the engine ready for spray paint. So there's a lot of stuff still not attached. That's deliberate just for better access. Obviously if the starter motor here, I wouldn't be able to spray the block. There's a few different things like the thermostat's not back in yet. I'll probably put that back in a minute because that will need spraying up too. There's the aluminium casing. That's going to require something slightly different from the cast iron. There's a lot of this kind of oxidized aluminium bubbling up here. So I think I'm going to start with Scotch-Brite and just see how it comes up. My plan is basically with the block, wire brush it back to clean metal, prime it, well, blah, 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 degrease it, prime it, then spray it like a top coat. I don't know, maybe I could go straight on for the top coat. I've got two different things I'm going to use. I've got, oh, I brought out two of the same thing. That's a mistake. I've got a primer somewhere. It's neither of these. I have a Rust-Oleum primer, which I'll grab in a sec, and I have this TK colour spray, which apparently is supposed to be a Yanmar grey, so we'll see how that comes out. Yeah, good times. I could wire brush the aluminium, but I'm worried it would scratch it up too much and it would show through the paint, so hence I'm starting with just Scotch-Brite, and we'll see how we go. I also tried to get the loom out of the way, but I can't disconnect the oil pressure sensor because it's gone all crusty, which is a bit of a pain, really. So I'm not really sure what to do about that. I could undo the diesel lines and pull it all over here and just, you can sit over there, get out of the way, or I keep trying to undo it from the sensor. I don't know. Maybe I'll undo the diesel lines. Let's do it. Cool. That's out of the way. Take the strain off the wire. Alright, it's looking a bit more accessible. Let's crack on! So what I've done is I've wire brushed off all the visible kind of rust and corrosion I could find. I've degreased it as best I can. I've used a compressor to try and blow all the kind of grit and trapped oil out of all the little spots where it's been hiding. I've masked up certain areas. What I'm going to do now is degrease it with acetone. And I'm probably going to put a hairdryer over where I'm about to paint just to warm the block up a little bit so that the paint goes off quicker. And then we should be good. This is my attempt to undo some of the diesel banjos, which I've just painted without damaging the paintwork, because I need to get some of the wiring behind them. So hopefully by softening up the contact patch, it won't completely wreck the paint I've just supplied. Typically, I've just filmed this whole thing with a load of audio and didn't have the microphone on because I'm a complete idiot. In short, some of this stuff that I've tried to zinc plate came out pretty well. This came out alright, for example. A few of the bolts did. Some stuff was patchy, and some stuff, unfortunately, the main thing that's on display just looks absolutely terrible. Obviously, didn't do a good enough job cleaning it up. You've got to be really fastidious with how well you kind of clean and degrease surfaces. I was in a bit of a rush by the time I got to the pulleys. I left them to last thinking that would help. It didn't help. And there was, you can see somebody's marks. Those were visible before I even tried plating it, and it was fairly obvious it wasn't going to go great. So I shouldn't have bothered, but hey, I was in a rush to get things done. I'm going to stick it on like that anyway. I've considered painting it, but I figure I kind of want to see how well it survives in a marine environment in that state. I imagine it'll rust up pretty quick, but hey, it can always be whipped off again and cleaned up when I've got a shorter job list to do. Alternator pulley doesn't look quite so bad, but still not as nice as how some of the bolts have come up. Anyway, whatever. Let's bolt some things back together. I wouldn't look too closely, but the engine mounts were fairly covered in surface rust, so I've just sort of lightly cleaned them back, wire brushed them back and given them a spray over, but I don't expect them to last very long. They seem to rust through pretty quickly with whatever they came with from the factory. Anyway, that's why I'd tart them up a little bit. Oh, they look hideous, don't they? Look how much they stand out as well. It looks absolutely terrible. Oh well. Should be two 50s, I think, and 170 left to go on. Yeah, so 70s for the front of the engine. 50s are for the back. The 70s are slightly stiffer elastomers. I'm not going to do these up too tight because I'm hoping to check and adjust the engine alignment when this thing goes back in. Cool, that's pretty much it done, I think. So it's not going to win any awards for beauty, but I think it's in a better shape than when it came off the boat. Got rid of all the visible rust, most of the visible rust. Obviously we've serviced the head, everything's back together, resealed. Next plan is to basically run it up and flush the coolant system with some special stuff and just try and clear out all the water channels basically. Yeah.